Today on Straight Talk about smart food, lessons in chemistry, protein chemistry to be exact, choosing the right protein for different extrusion applications, processing conditions, and how it all comes together.
You can tell I do this a lot.
Plus, our new capabilities and what it's doing for MGP customers.
This is Straight Talk about smart food, a podcast about that fascinating place where food and science intersect.
Hi guys, welcome back to Straight Talk about smart food. I'm really excited to actually have you guys here today because I feel like I've got smart people to talk to. I'm Jennifer Dunn Carlson. I'm the senior scientist in product development at MGP, but I've got
Rachel Matasic, senior scientist in R&D here at MGP.
Tanya Jurideshashai. I'm the vice president of R&D at MGP.
The reason I'm so excited is because, this is the topic I don't have as much knowledge on as you do, right? Which is protein chemistry, right? Dr. Matasic has her protein chemistry PhD. So I want to know more about it because...
Yeah. Me too.
Right? Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where I don't understand, right? We talk about inclusions, right? Especially the ones that we deal with in our products that we work with, right? The texturized protein and then the ingredient inclusions, right? And so, but it's like...
So we want to talk about protein chemistry and extrusion.
Yes, in extrusion, right? Specifically, like when you're talking extrusion chemistry, right? Mm-hmm. Protein chemistry. So when you're looking at, like, from a product development perspective, right? I'm always looking at it from a texture, flavor, what have you. But, I'm assuming that's not exactly what you're thinking about. So can you kind of give me the rundown of, you're putting something through your extruder. What are you looking for in, a raw material or?
Yeah, I think that's right where you start is with your raw materials. But I think when you take a step back and look at things actually systematically, we got to look with extrusion. People think, oh, you just extrude it. But if we're looking at two different types of products, like you said, like our textured protein versus our snack crisps, those are actually two very different types of processing and extrusion. Although they use the same equipment, we have different needs in raw materials, we have different needs within the processing, and then we have different needs in the outcome of those things. So when I look at textured protein ingredients, again, like you said, let's start at the raw materials. Textured protein, we're using protein as the main source of this structure that we're going to make. So we want proteins that have kind of these high molecular weights. And why I say that is, let's take a step back from just raw materials and proteins. Let's talk about proteins in general. When we're looking at these meat analogs, we're using plant proteins. And plant proteins typically exist in this quaternary large globular structure. So functional proteins are typically globular proteins, but then we have a lot of other protein classes in plant proteins called albumins, and we have prolamins and all sorts of different classes. But really, globulins are what we're looking for with extruded products. And the reason I say that is they have these large, complex structures. And when we send them through something like an extruder, where they're going to get hydrated, and then they're going to have shear and pressure and heat to basically kind of damage the protein structure and unalign it into more of either tertiary, secondary structures, and then realign these proteins. So we're taking them from a globular state, we're going to unfold them, that's called denaturing. So we're going to denature them to a certain extent so that they can realign together and interact together with, other phases in there. So we call protein kind of our continuous phase. And then we have other things in our formula like starch as our dispersed phase, which go in between our protein structures and create that laminar flow. So we have proteins interacting together, and then we have starch that kind of comes through and helps to create those stable structures through the extruder. So when I'm looking at raw materials, I want a protein that has that ability to unfold and interact with itself. So something like a high molecular weight with high gel strength, or something that has that ability to hold more water so that it can interact with itself, it interacts with the starch phase, it interacts with water. So it can kind of create this laminar flow structure that comes out of the extruder.
When you say laminar, you mean like in layers, like
Yes.
phyllo dough laminate, not like
Yes.
laminar flow as in like a fluid that's laminar.
Right.
Okay.
But we want those proteins to be able to melt, plasticize, and then work together, aggregate, and come out of the extruder and be stable. So they're interacting with each other. But then when we talk about something like a protein crisp that we talked about before, that laminar structure is kind of what we're avoiding. So there's a lot that we can do, because there are proteins that we can use for texturization, and then there are some that we can use for crisps, and there's some that can do both. And it's all in the processing. So where you're adding the water, so adding, yes.
Sorry, with the
No, go
crisp, what kind of protein do you want then?
So crisps are a lot more forgiving than textured proteins, because you typically have a lot more starch in that formulation than you would with a textured protein ingredient. And so that helps with the expansion. When I'm looking at the protein ingredient itself, again, I want it to have good gel strength, so I know that's going to interact together. So it's going to be a cohesive crisp. But I don't want that gel strength to be too high that it's going to end up texturizing and only interacting with itself. So we want less of a phase separation with crisp and more of an interaction together with crisps. So like I said, there's proteins that can kind of do both, and it's all in the processing. So when we look at extrusion, with crisp extrusion, we really don't need a preconditioner, especially with low protein crisps, because we don't really need to like melt and plasticize anything. We kind of can send it through and add the water more in the barrel. Whereas textured proteins, we're adding a lot more water up front in that preconditioner, so that we're getting those proteins really hydrated, so that when they hit the barrel, they can melt, they can plasticize and interact together. Versus really on the crisp side, that's different. So we're putting a lot less work into the product, and we're putting our water elsewhere. Another thing that I think we need to mention too is, we're talking about water, but crisps typically use a lot less water than textured proteins, even dry textured proteins. High moisture meat analogs are a whole different kind of animal. So I guess here we're really just talking about like dry textured proteins. When we do dry textured proteins, they do go through a dryer, but when they come out of the barrel, we don't really want a lot of that water flash off, because that creates expansion. So we want to kind of up ramp the crisps to get that really big pressure at that die, so that water flashes off and then creates more expansion within that product. So those are little bit of the differences. I went on a little bit of a tangent there.
I was going to circle it back sort of
Yeah.
around. So when you're talking about protein functionality in crisp, right? Does that, like, for texturized proteins, you basically want the most undenatured proteins in the largest form for texturized protein?
Such a great question.
And then for crisp, can you handle, like, I want to say lower quality proteins that have more of that like hydrolysis in them already?
So I wouldn't call them lower quality. I
Okay.
would just say they have different functional properties. This is such a good question, because it was actually a question like during my PhD, I asked one of my committee members, I said, okay, I have these 2 protein isolates, I want to extrude them. This one is basically completely denatured. Don't you think that that would, extrude better? Because it's already kind of done the first step that we're looking for in extrusion. And then we have this very not denatured protein. It's a good question that I think still needs to be answered, because ideally what I'm thinking is you could add less work into that product if it's already denatured. But really what the science and chemistry tell us is you're going to overwork that then, because it's going to realign, and then it still has that whole barrel to go through, and those aggregates start to break. And so we get more brittle product, and we get less of a cohesive, good texture coming out of there. So it's really a balance, because no commercial protein is going to be completely not denatured, just because processing has some denaturation.
Extraction has some things going on.
Right. But if you have a completely denatured protein, then you're kind of in this weird limbo of let's see how it goes. You might need to
Would
really change your processing.
so so if you were going to try a denatured protein, just thought experiment with me for a second. Would you be able to do that? Like you said, less work. So could you do it in like a single barrel, like a single screw extruder, or do you think you need the twin screw for the?
So from my
Plasticization.
experience, I don't believe that and maybe correct me, with a texturized protein, you really need the work of a twin screw extruder. Have you seen else?
There are textured protein with single screw, but the quality is very different. You
Yeah.
almost make a very different product.
Sure.
So I think what we're going for is something that comes out of a twin screw extruder. But you can add more or less work by adjusting your water, your screw speed, your feed rates, and a combination
Right.
of those together to get
Well,
what
and a
you're
lot of the
looking
twin
for.
screws will have
Different elements on there.
different
So different pitch
lengths,
and
depths to get to like more or less work that way
yes,
too.
and then you can have reverse elements on there. You can have
like
all
mixing
sorts
and
of
meeting
things. Yep.
globes and things like that. Yeah.
So you can keep your product in the barrel longer, add more work to it. You can send it backwards to re-go forwards, and
Yeah.
there's all sorts of things you can do there. And finding that is really an art, which I don't have that art in me. We luckily have partners
practice,
and
right?
people that we consult with to help us.
Right. So, okay. So when you're looking at textural properties, right? Like, especially for nutritional bars, right? You always want those really nice, crispy, light textured crisps, right? That function well in a bar.
Something
but
kind of like this.
Yeah, something like
Beautiful.
that. So, like, I guess when you're talking expansion versus texturization, like,
Yeah.
what kind of textural characteristics give you that, like, glassy versus brittle, especially when you're talking formulas that might be similar in protein content? Like, a texturized protein's what, like 80-ish, or is it more than that % protein?
I will say you're around the right range, but I'm not going to confirm.
Right, right.
Yes, when we get those protein crisps that hit around 70, 75, 80%, protein, like I said, likes to interact with itself typically. So you can very quickly go from something that is nice and expanded at a lower protein content. You start upping the protein and it starts to become less and less expanded because that protein's interacting more with itself. We have a lot of things going on
So does
there.
that give you more of a brittle texture, like glassy, sharp, or does it give you more of that like chewy, fibrous type
That
texture?
depends. It could actually be very grainy, where it's just not very cohesive at all. You could get very glassy, brittle. I've seen it be very protein dependent. And typically, those proteins that like to texturize, if you start to try to expand them, you can very quickly cross a line of expanded to glassy when you're doing these crisp extrusion.
And does for my own edification, glassy in this instance means texturized, or does it mean just brittle, sharp
More brittle and sharp.
texture? Yeah.
Yeah, brittle and sharp.
I've
So-
seen brittle and sharp crisps. That's why I was
Yes.
asking.
And I think for some applications, which maybe this is more of a question for you, glassy and brittle is kind of good based on moisture migration? No.
Maybe, right? So maybe. I think like
Depending
on the application, right? So it might in something that where it needs to hold that, where it, like, because when you have moisture migration and crisp, that doesn't necessarily get lighter or crispier. Starting glassy doesn't bring you back to crispy. It could just take you to chewy, right?
Yeah.
It's staling. It's not
Right.
becoming more crispy, right?
Okay.
So, but if you have something that's brittle or glassy that breaks up easily and you want that sort of texture, but you have it in a low water activity, it might be okay. Something more like if you're going for like a crunchy filling and you want it to like, you want to shear the tar out of it so it breaks up anyway.
Yeah.
And so then you have this sort of like cookie butter type texture that would give you, that's actually desirable depending on what you want.
The more I learn. That's
Yeah.
why we work close together.
You're right. That's why I'm trying to learn more about like texturization versus expansion regardless. That way, when I'm trying to develop products with the ingredients we make, I have a good understanding of like, how does this going to work? So I guess one thing I do need to probably talk about, or at least ask about, is nutritional content of these things, right? Because there's always, everybody always wants more, especially now with the protein trends being like more protein, higher protein, keto friendly, better quality nutrition. So how does extrusion on proteins change the quality? Does it?
A lot of times when I am talking to peers or I'm talking to potential customers or I'm talking to the commercial team, they ask, oh, okay, is this formulation going to give us a PDCAS or protein digestibility corrected amino acid score of 1?
You said that in one breath. I'm impressed.
You can tell I do this a lot. And my knee-jerk response is always, well, I can't tell you about the PDCAS until we have the product and we test the PDCAS of it. You can look at the amino acid score and you can try to put those two amino acid profiles together of maybe you have complementary proteins you're putting together to try to reach the highest amino acid score you have. Or you have an ingredient. I know canola protein is infamously one of them that has a PDCAS of 1. So it does contain all of the essential amino acids at the appreciable amounts that we need. But when you put it through an extruder, we have to think about the protein chemistry of it. So all these amino acids, which are on the primary level of protein structure. And like I said earlier, we have quaternary structures, we have tertiary and secondary. When we unfold or denature these proteins in extrusion, we're exposing more of these amino acids. And then when we start to cross-link them or aggregate them together through the extruder to make these textured products, we are potentially covalently bonding these amino acids together so that they're less bioavailable in our bodies. But we have to go back to, we've also exposed a lot of amino acids. So it could offset itself. We could increase the digestibility. It's just kind of, you won't know until you test it.
That is true. We've done that. We put together formulation, extruded before. We thought we were going to get a 1, and then it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that happens.
And sometimes you think it's going to be lower based on, okay, it was lower for this one. You go to the next formulation, you kind of go for a lower amount, and then you have some sort of interactions that happen, and then your digestibility is higher than you expected it to be. It's just, you have to test it. You can't assume based on a formulation, but also you can't assume, oh, okay, we're always going to decrease our digestibility or we're always going to increase it. And another thing I want to tack on to this, you can tell I'm passionate.
Right. This is why we
love it.
Yes. Through extrusion, we have, like I said earlier, we have shear, pressure, high heat, but there's things in food like trypsin inhibitors and soy protein. And when we go through that processing, so those trypsin inhibitors will inhibit us from digesting trypsin, which is an essential amino acid. And then we go through this processing and we essentially destroy, for lack of a better word, our trypsin inhibitors or these other...
Right, like, you're denaturing that protein as well.
Exactly, that then make it more digestible. So it's not just about amino acids. There's other things happening that we have to consider, and digestibility is not just an on-the-paper amino acid score combination. I'm obviously passionate.
Fair. Well, it's good, because, I mean, you need to have a response, right, when someone asks you this question, which I'm sure you get frequently.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's a big, misconception, or there are a lot of malpractice on PDCAS and the claims.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I have
a
lot of opinions. I think that we always tend to overshoot or oversell our products when we really just need to be transparent.
Yeah. Well, I've always seen
MGP,
it.
Not MGP. I mean, just in general.
we as an industry in general.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot on them. You see it on the boxes and in packaging. They sort of work around it, right? I'm sure you've seen it where it's like they don't tell you it's a good source of protein. They don't tell you it's an excellent source of protein. They just tell you that
percentage.
Product, that product has 20 grams in it.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're making a claim, you have to have digestibility into consideration.
If it's structure function. If you say good or excellent, for sure. It has to be. But if you're just calling it out as like this is how much is in it.
Yeah. Contains 20 grams of protein.
Ta-da!
It might.
Yeah,
It does. It's not
but
all
not a good
digestible.
one.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't necessarily mean it's good source, excellent source.
Yeah, on the protein testing there and nutritional labeling itself, there are a lot of controversial on protein testing.
I know. It's a don't get me started. We could go on forever.
Yeah, I think we should do a podcast dedicated to protein testing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information there. I think that's a
Well,
good
I would
idea.
definitely be curious to learn about it,
Yeah,
right?
me too. Yeah.
I guess this kind of leads into sort of like the new shiny toy we have here in Atchison, right?
I was
Which
going to
is-
say maybe Tanya can talk about
I can try.
all of our fun
Please
toys
do.
Yes.
and our capabilities here in Atchison now.
I can talk about our toy. So I don't know if it's a toy, but a really cool capabilities that we have. So we have a new extrusion facility in Atchison, really brand new and really world-class facility that we have with a world-class scientist and operation and QA. So it's a twin screw extruder, really large capacity, and we can do anything. We try to focus on grain-based, so it's going to be textured protein and crisp and other products that use grains.
Awesome.
Yeah. We have a lot that we can do there, and it's
Yeah.
fun to kind of figure out, especially as we're kind of entering inquiries that we're
Yeah.
getting, and we're like, could we do this?
Yeah, I was
And
gonna say,
there's so much that we can do with an
Yeah.
extruder. It's not just textured protein and crisp, right?
Right.
Extruder is that huge machine with
Dog treats.
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I was like, I don't know if we could do pasta, but it would certainly be.
Pasta. It's gonna be. They're a better machine for pasta.
Yeah, I would say so. Like
Yeah.
pasta, cookie dough, things like that,
Yeah.
where it's like that's a really complicated system.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if you would need as much work on like a chocolate chip dough.
Yeah, but no, if we have inquiries, we love to work with them. Yeah.
Okay, so you said grain based, right? But we also do Proterra 2100, which is pea based. So is it, when you say grain, do you mean just starches or what else?
Oh, thank you. So grain, flour base, and as well as legumes and some oilseed.
Sure.
So yeah, our equipment allow us to use all kinds of raw materials. Could be starch, could be flour, could be coarse materials too. So we're really excited about this new capabilities. Yeah, it will help us. It will really help us to work with customer closely to come up with new product faster. New R&D projects. So I don't know, it's a toy for R&D. It's a work for operation.
Yeah,
right.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
Fortunately,
Always.
though, we're both based in Atchison, so
Yeah.
it's just a hop, skip, and a jump over there to, work together,
Are
brainstorm.
there anything we're trying to stay away from? Like I know like allergen wise, is there anything like that?
Yeah, we can review what customer have in mind, but no meat products right now that we want in
Sure.
the plant. That's too much work.
No animal-based
Yeah.
products.
No animal based.
So-
So you're talking
Way-
dairy as
yeah,
well.
dairy.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
correct,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Want to keep it plant positive.
Yeah.
Pun
Plant
intended.
based. Right. Okay. Cool. Well, I think that wraps up most of the questions I had. Thanks you guys for coming to the pod and being on Straight Talk About Smart Food with me and giving me some new information I can use to be dangerous.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
MGP's food scientists are here to solve your culinary challenges. Contact us to discuss how we can help provide delicious solutions for you. Go to mgpingredients.com and click Contact Us.
This podcast does not constitute professional advice, nor does it constitute any terms, guarantees, warranties, representations, or conditions to podcast listeners regarding MGP products and services.